They thought she was just another face they could intimidate. Just another black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time with no one watching. But what they didn't know, what would make them tremble 30 minutes later, was who she really was. In a small rural town where power wore a uniform and prejudice hid behind a badge, they made one of the gravest mistakes of their careers. They tied her to a tree like an animal, mocked her, laughed, filmed it for their own amusement. And all the while, she stayed calm. Because deep down, she knew exactly how this story would end. Welcome to Talecraft, where we don't just tell stories, we expose truths the world needs to hear. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit that like, share, and subscribe button so you never miss the moments that make your heart race and your mind think. Now let me ask you, what would you do if someone you loved was humiliated like this? If their dignity was stripped away in the open and no one stood up for them? Would you stay silent, or would you rise? That's the question this story dares to ask. And the answer will leave you stunned. Our story begins with a quiet drive through a sleepy town in the South. A black woman, mid-40s, dignified, polished, intelligent, on her way to a wellness retreat tucked deep in the woods. She wasn't speeding. She didn't break any laws. But still, flashing lights filled her rearview mirror. A patrol car. Then two. Pulled over on a gravel path with nothing around for miles. She complied, spoke clearly, offered her license. But the moment they saw her, really saw her, something changed in their tone. They didn't see a professional. They didn't see a person. They saw a target. From there it escalated fast. Too fast. They claimed her ID was fake. Claimed she was acting suspicious. One of them laughed as they dragged her from the car. She didn't resist, not because she was afraid but because she was calculating. She knew every word, every movement, every glance would be used against her. Then came the unthinkable. They walked her to the edge of the woods, forced her to sit against a tree, and bound her wrists to the bark with zip ties. "This is what happens when you people don't cooperate," one officer sneered. The other pulled out his phone. "Smile for the camera." But she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked up through the canopy of trees above her, as if the sky was watching. And perhaps it was. Because what those officers didn't realize, what the entire town would soon find out, is that the woman they had treated like dirt wasn't just a victim. She was power. She was justice. She was trained to dismantle institutions like theirs, one law, one name, one federal order at a time. And she wasn't alone. Because somewhere not far away people were coming. And they were coming fast. The road had been quiet. Trees lined both sides, their green canopies swaying gently above. The woman, her name was Dr. Lena Taylor, drove steadily in her black SUV. She had a soft jazz playlist humming in the background, her phone on silent, her GPS guiding her toward a wellness retreat deep in the countryside. This was supposed to be a weekend of silence, of disconnection. No politics. No people. No phones. Just trees writing and breathing. But the retreat would never come. Instead, a pair of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. And everything changed. She pulled over calmly, placed her hands on the steering wheel, and lowered her window before the officer even approached. Years of training had taught her to stay composed, even in hostile situations. The first officer swaggered up slowly, one hand resting on his belt, the other gripping a flashlight despite it being broad daylight. "License and registration," he said, his tone sharp, clipped. She complied without hesitation. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" she asked politely. "You swerved," he replied, though she hadn't. Then came the second officer, circling her SUV like a shark. Something in his eyes felt off. They made her step out of the vehicle. No explanation. No charges. One of them said her ID didn't look real. She offered her second form of identification, a federal badge, though not with her title, but even that was met with suspicion. "This looks made up," one of them muttered. Then without cause they told her she was being detained. When she asked for a supervisor they laughed. "You think you can start making demands?" one snapped. "You're in the wrong county for that, sweetheart." She was handcuffed. But it wouldn't stop there. They walked her roughly down a wooded trail, off the road, out of sight. It was only a few yards but it felt like miles. "Since you want to play tough," one of them said, pulling out zip ties, "you can wait for backup right here." They forced her down against a tall pine tree and bound her wrists to the trunk. A mocking smile spread across the second officer's face. "Consider this a lesson in cooperation." One of them took out his phone and began filming. "Let's see what your little friends think of this when it goes viral." Lena stayed quiet. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Her silence unnerved them. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Dr. Lena Taylor wasn't just any woman. Behind her calm eyes was a resume that would humble senators. A former Army intelligence officer, now a federal human rights prosecutor. She had taken down corrupt judges. She had survived war zones. She had interrogated warlords. She had eaten fear for breakfast. And now, bound to a tree by two small-town bullies, she was gathering everything. Badge numbers, physical descriptions, audio patterns, body language, like filing evidence in her mind. Every second that passed was another charge she was building. The woods were quiet but not empty. Two hikers had seen the incident from a distance. Unsure of what to do, they had begun recording. They didn't recognize her. They didn't know who she was. But something in their gut told them this wasn't right. They sent the footage to a local reporter who recognized her instantly. And just like that, the storm began. The footage went from inbox to newsroom, from newsroom to federal email. Within minutes, a silent alarm triggered systems far beyond this sleepy town. The retreat coordinator who hadn't seen her arrive also sent an alert. The name Lena Taylor had more power than those officers could ever imagine. Back at the tree, Lena looked up again, sunlight breaking through the branches. She could hear a faint rumble in the distance. Tires, maybe? Or maybe it was thunder. She had seen this before. She had seen the moment right before the system snaps. And it always started the same way, with silence. The officers had gone back to their patrol car, laughing. They thought she was nothing. But help was already on its way. Not because she called. Not because she cried. But because the world was about to see who she really was. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The sound came first, low, distant, and unmistakable. It wasn't thunder. It was wheels. Tires crunching gravel with precision. From around the bend came a sleek, black SUV followed by two unmarked federal vehicles. The convoy didn't roll in like a rescue. It charged like a storm. Birds scattered. Dust rose. And for the first time the officers looked up from their laughter. Confusion crossed their faces. Then concern. The lead SUV skidded to a sharp stop. Before the dust settled, four men in black suits stepped out, stern faces, earpieces glowing. One of them barked, "Where is Dr. Lena Taylor?" Officer Daniels blinked. "Who?" he asked, shifting nervously. The second agent held up a tablet with Lena's photo on the screen. "This woman. Federal prosecutor. Missing. Last seen in this jurisdiction." At that moment the second officer, Briggs, turned ghost white. He stammered, She matched a suspicious profile. We had her detained for questioning." The agent didn't wait for the explanation to finish. He and two others moved swiftly toward the wooded path. Lena was still sitting, still calm, still silent. But when she saw them, her eyes finally flickered, not with relief but with readiness. "Cut her free," one agent ordered. The zip ties snapped. Another agent gently helped her to her feet. She straightened her blouse, brushed off pine needles from her sleeves and stood tall. Even after hours bound to a tree, she radiated authority. One of the agents handed her a phone. On the other end was the U.S. Attorney General. "Dr. Taylor," the voice said, "are you safe?" Lena answered without hesitation, "I am now." The agent nodded. "Would you like us to handle it quietly?" She paused, eyes narrowing at the officers now surrounded by armed feds. "No," she replied. "Let the system see itself." Loud and clear. Back at the patrol car, Daniels and Briggs were being disarmed. Their badges removed, their radios silenced. "Wait. This is insane. We didn't know who she was." Briggs shouted. That, it turns out, was the final nail. Because they weren't apologizing for what they did. They were apologizing for who they did it to. Lena stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "So if I were a nobody, this would be fine?" she asked. "You didn't tie me up because I broke a law. You tied me up because you thought no one would care." Silence swept over everyone. The officers looked at the ground, ashamed, exposed. Reporters had arrived by now, tipped off by the hiker's viral video. Cameras clicked. Microphones were raised. Lena didn't need a press conference. She didn't need a statement. She just stood there, powerful and still. A reporter finally asked, "Dr. Taylor, what will you do next?" She looked into the camera and with quiet resolve said, "I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Not to me. Not to anyone." Then she turned and walked past the flashing lights, leaving the badge wearers in stunned silence. Within hours, the footage reached national television. "Federal prosecutor bound to tree by local police," flashed across every headline. Talk shows dissected the body cam footage, the zip tie bruises, the absolute indifference shown by those who claim to protect and serve. The FBI released a public statement. This was not just misconduct, it was criminal. Dozens of civil rights attorneys offered to represent Lena, but she declined. This isn't about me. It's about how many times this happens in the shadows, she told one anchor. This one just got caught in the light. In the following days, Lena addressed Congress during an emergency oversight hearing on police abuse of power. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply laid out facts about systemic failures, about unchecked authority, about what happens when uniforms are mistaken for immunity. What happened to me wasn't a mistake, she said. It was a pattern. One I've seen in courtrooms across this country. But this time I lived it. Her testimony triggered a federal probe into the town's entire police department. Internal affairs turned into external indictments. But perhaps the most poetic moment came when she returned to that tree a month later. This time with schoolchildren, local activists, and community leaders. Together, they planted a circle of wildflowers around the base. A plaque was added, to every voice they tried to silence and every root that stood strong. It didn't erase what happened, but it reclaimed the space. From fear to hope. From shame to strength. And at the center of it all stood Lena, flawed, fierce, and unforgettable. Not because she fought back with fists, but because she reminded everyone that sometimes, the most dangerous thing a person can be, is unshakably composed. The media explosion was instant and relentless. News vans lined the small-town streets. Local officials ducked reporters at every corner. Footage of Dr. Lena Taylor tied to a tree was played on national television every hour, a shameful reminder of what happens when power meets ignorance. Hashtags like #JusticeForLena and #TiedToTruth trended globally. Civil rights groups descended on the town, demanding not just accountability, but transformation. The world had seen what happened and it wasn't going to forget. Lena didn't say much publicly at first. She let the silence simmer just as the officers once had. Now the silence burned them. Officer Daniels and Officer Briggs were suspended within hours and arrested within days. Federal charges were filed, unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, and racially motivated misconduct. Their union tried to shield them, but the evidence was undeniable. The video, the eyewitness accounts, the bruises on Lena's wrists, they painted a damning picture. The police chief resigned under pressure. The mayor of the town issued a public apology, trembling as he read the statement on national TV. We failed Dr. Taylor. We failed our citizens. And we failed ourselves. But it wasn't enough. The people wanted change, not just words. Lena, ever composed, finally addressed the nation. Standing at a podium outside the federal courthouse, she spoke to a sea of microphones. I wasn't the first. I might not be the last. But I will be the line in the sand. She didn't demand vengeance. She demanded structure. Policies. Oversight. Her speech was broadcast live, reaching millions. This isn't about bad apples, she said. It's about planting better trees. Her words echoed through schools, government offices, and police academies. Law professors quoted her. Youth leaders rallied behind her. She had become something much bigger than a victim. She was now a movement. In the weeks that followed, Lena partnered with legislators to draft what would become known as the Civic Accountability Act. The act called for mandatory body cam audits, third-party investigations of abuse claims, and the abolishment of zip-tie detainments without charge. It gained bipartisan support not because of political pressure, but because her story made it impossible to look away. We didn't just hear her pain, one senator said. We saw it and we felt it. Schoolchildren sent her letters. Churches held vigils. Celebrities spoke out. The tree she had been tied to became a memorial, then a landmark. But beyond the headlines and legislation, Lena made her mission personal. She returned to the town, not as a visitor but as a teacher. She organized community forums, invited police officers and residents to sit across from each other. She spoke in classrooms, teaching young black girls that their silence could be a strategy, but never their defeat. Dignity is louder than shouting, she told one group. It echoes longer. And it cuts deeper. Even those who had once defended the officers came to see her not with resentment, but with reverence. Because she hadn't come back to punish, she came back to rebuild. The town itself changed. Slowly. But visibly. A new police chief, black, female and fiercely principled, was appointed. Officers were retrained. Diversity committees were formed. Murals were painted across the community, not of anger but of resilience. Lena's face, calm and unwavering, became a symbol etched on walls and hearts. Not everyone celebrated, of course. Some held on to their old beliefs. But they were now the minority, quiet, fading. Because the loudest voice was no longer hate. It was hope. And it spoke through every corner of that small town that once tried to break her. Through it all, Lena never referred to herself as a hero. "I was just doing what I was trained to do," she said during an interview. Observe. Survive. Led. But to those who had watched, to those who had once felt invisible, she was exactly that, a hero in silence. She had been tied to a tree in shame. Now she stood tall like one. Rooted, unshaken, and reaching skyward. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was a forest of change. One woman. One moment. And a legacy that could no longer be ignored. Long after the cameras packed up and the headlines shifted, the memory of what happened remained. Not as a wound but as a warning. The tree where Lena had been tied now stood surrounded by wildflowers, visited by students, tourists, and dreamers alike. What was once a symbol of hate had become a pillar of transformation. Dr. Lena Taylor didn't ask for justice with fury, she embodied it with restraint. In a world screaming to be heard, she whispered with strength. And the world listened. Her legacy wasn't built in courtrooms or protests alone, but in the quiet, controlled fire of her grace. This story wasn't just about what happened to Lena, it was about what could happen to anyone who's seen as less than, dismissed, or erased. It reminded us that appearances deceive, and assumptions destroy. That dignity is not earned through uniform or title, but how you treat others when no one's watching. In a moment where the line between right and wrong was sharp as glass, Lena stood still and uncut. She reminded us all, the most dangerous kind of power is the kind wrapped in silence, patience, and truth. And when it's unleashed, it doesn't need to roar. It simply changes everything. If this story moved you even just a little, help us spread it. Like this video so more people hear it. Share it with someone who believes in quiet power. Subscribe to Tailcraft for more real stories that pierce the noise and go deeper. And please, comment below, what would you have done in Lena's place? Or in the officers'? Let's talk, learn, and grow. Because every time we tell the truth, we plant another root. And one day those roots become the trees no one can ever cut down.